I'm Huw Thomas, and I'm a partner at Carey Olsen in Jersey. I practice across a range of areas, including employment law, data protection and privacy, and anything, frankly, slightly strange or weird. This is Carey Olsen's podcast, People, Behaviour and Governance, in which we talk to people that have interested us or look at issues which have either challenged or interested us in the recent past. Today, we're talking about the issue of anxiety and imposter syndrome and/or imposter phenomenon, depending on who you're reading at that particular time. And I'd like to welcome Jess Dunsdon to the pod. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Come in to talk to us about her experiences with things like anxiety and imposter syndrome. What's imposter syndrome? Well, it's a persistent inability to believe your success is deserved or achieved by working hard and possessing distinct skills, but rather by other means such as luck or being in the right place at the right time. And it's often accompanied with feelings of self-doubt, fear of success or failure, or self-sabotage. And KPMG, in their 2020 report, suggested that 75% of executive women reported having personally experienced imposter syndrome at certain points in their career. More recent commentators have noted, though, that doubt, anxiety, and feeling like an imposter aren't necessarily the preserve of women. In fact, they're not necessarily gendered at all. Men feel all of those things as well. A lot of the issues come in the way in which organisations still treat women and men very distinctively, particularly when it comes to things like confidence. With that in mind, Jess Dunsdon, anchor for many years of ITV Channel News, where you've been since 2008.
Yep.
And before that, you've worked in various news organisations, including Sky,
Russia Today, my dubious years.
And before that, you read law at Cambridge.
I did, yes.
But you escaped law.
I did escape law, yes. Wasn't for me. I figured out at university.
Something to be lauded about that. But by any measure, you're a high achiever and very much squarely in the public eye, and outwardly somebody who's very, very high in confidence. And you're in a job which must require it on a daily basis. But you're on the record as having had to deal with things like anxiety in the past. How's that sort of affected you?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is I think the two things can coexist. So you can have confidence and suffer with anxiety. And also those things wax and wane over time, depending on situations. So, some days I might be high in confidence, other days in low in confidence. But in terms of the anxiety, I mean, this was an episode that happened to me, funnily enough, 10 years ago, around this time of year. And I had never experienced anything like it. It's like somebody hijacked my brain when I was 32. And I never really experienced any form of fear or self-doubt, consciously anyway. So it hit me like a train, having anxiety. I mean, it literally came overnight and lasted for a good 9 months. And since that episode 10 years ago, I definitely have had little episodes, but I've learnt to deal with it a lot better. And I think in time, actually, I've become more confident in my job because of, the treatment I had for anxiety and unpicking why I felt the way I felt at that particular time.
And how did you learn to deal with it? What strategies do you use to?
Therapy. I mean, I would suggest to anybody who struggles with anything that feels that's getting in the way of your life, go to a good therapist and unpick it, because although it feels like it has no rhyme or reason, we all learn coping mechanisms as kids, things we've done to survive in whatever environment we've grown up in. And, I learned through my therapy, I had a very dominant father, quite a submissive mother. And I think from my father, I learned when I was watching their relationship, I thought, well, if I'm going to be like anybody, I want to be more like my dad because, he called the shots, he earned the money, he was very successful and very charismatic, gregarious. People just, he was a very attractive person. And I think I just looked at him and thought, right, I don't want to be a doormat. I'm going to be more like that. So I learnt as a child to be very dominant, very confident, bordering on aggressive, just very ruthless actually in terms of having goals and doing everything, working hard as well to achieve those goals. So I was a very resilient child, but I've learned as I've got older that doesn't always serve you very well in relationships, in work. And I think what happened, I think you almost become quite a victim of your own success, because when you achieve certain things, you create a level of expectation. And then you put pressure on yourself to meet those expectations. Other people have those expectations of you. And suddenly, I think I felt a lot of pressure in my early 30s. And I think that time of your life, you're thinking about having kids, and suddenly I kind of got into a spin about, oh my God, how am I gonna keep this going? And I think I was suffering from some definitely burnout, I think you'd call it now. But I couldn't recognize it. It wasn't really talked about at the time. So this was back in 2013. So I think this was before the wave of it's okay not to be okay and all that, that.
Well-being.
Yeah, well-being and all of these, buzzwords, actually. And yeah, I think that explained it really. So I think definitely achieving fed into that anxiety. And I think on the outside, people were flummoxed, thinking, why are you feeling so anxious? You've got it. You've proved yourself. And for me, it was that sustaining that level of performance. And it's very much the internal narrative in my head. Nobody actually really was externally putting pressure on myself. It was all my internal dialogue about what I thought people were thinking, So now I've gone through therapy and unpicked it all. I'm much better at managing the voices, the narrative in my head, and also the physiological symptoms, because anxiety, I mean, have you ever experienced it? It can be quite crippling. Like if you're standing on stage and you've got anxiety where you go into freeze mode, you can't do the job. So I've learned physical strategies, breathing, taking time to have headspace, exercise, diet, all those things that we're taught about. So in terms of managing it, because I've been through the worst of it, I know it can never be as bad as it was 10 years ago, because I understand it better now. And as I say, I've learned strategies now to basically talk to myself in a different way. When I'm feeling anxious, I lean into it a bit more. So I think the worst thing you can do when you've got an anxiety is to be anxious about being anxious, because then you just go down this vortex of doom. So I think for me, a big thing has been learning to talk to myself with more compassion, more kindness, more empathy. And actually in doing that, I've become much better at understanding other people. So although it was, don't get me wrong, it was the worst experience I've had in my life, it served me really well in terms of my development over the past 10 years.
And how did your employer deal with it? Were they good?
They were really good. Yeah. I just didn't help myself. So I remember actually about this time of year sitting in front of my boss, just, I didn't recognize myself. And I'm pretty sure she was quite shocked to see me like that, because it was it was the polar opposite to the Jess that everybody knew. And she was very understanding. I don't know how understanding you can be if you've never been through it. But, my doctor wanted to sign me off for 6 weeks. And because part of my anxiety was a fear of losing my job, the thought of being signed off for 6 weeks terrified me even more. It made my anxiety worse. So I didn't do that, but I definitely worked with my employer to dial down some of my responsibilities just for a period of time. And they were really good actually in terms of regular conversations and listening to what I needed at various points. So,
and do you think what we expect of women in those situations is different from what we expect of men in terms of confidence, in terms of feeling anxiety?
I don't think it should be. I think we're all human beings, aren't we? And so we all struggle with these feelings. I think a lot of it depends on how honest you are with yourself and what how good you are at voicing your needs. And I think maybe men are worse at that. So maybe men don't get the help and understanding they need because they're not being honest.
Sort of encouraged to be silent.
Yeah, I think, and I understand that because, as I say, my modelling for growing up was to be resilient, tough, to just dig. When the problem with anxiety, the more you try and fight your way out of it, the worse it is. So the worst you can do is fight against it, ironically. And that's how I got myself in a pickle, quite frankly, is that I was so hell-bent on trying to fix it that I was just making it worse. So I think there's an analogy with anxiety that it's like quicksand. If you fight, you're just going to sink deeper and deeper. Whereas actually, if you just let it be, float to this, eventually you'll just float to the surface. So I think now my strategy with dealing with anxiety is to acknowledge it, is to say, okay, yeah, I see you. I know you're there, but I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. So for me, it's not a burying and dismissing feelings. It's an acknowledgement, but equally not letting it stop me doing what I need to do.
And what about things like imposter syndrome or phenomenon, depending on... does that play a part in anxiety? Yeah,
probably. But I think that also feeds into the honesty part, doesn't it? That I think if we're honest about being imposters and playing certain roles, because all of us at work, we play various roles. I play a TV presenter, you play a lawyer. Obviously, we have to do a certain amount of work to get to that place. But I think if you acknowledge that that's not your whole person, then it makes it a little bit easier to deal with.
Because the role you do, of course, is in public.
Yeah.
Is outwardly authoritative.
Yeah.
Does that make it worse in terms of anxiety and imposter syndrome, or does it make it better because you think you...
So I think, do you know what? In my 20s, in the first decade of my career, I definitely think I had imposter syndrome, but it was so far buried that I didn't really recognise it. But how I would recognise it looking back is that I definitely overcompensated. You've probably come across these people, right, who are overly confident, that they come across a bit arrogant, a bit inauthentic. And actually, I don't think we trust people like that. So I think that's how I think in some people it can play out in overconfidence and overcompensation. I think that was the case for me, is that I think I was overcompensating in my role to try and prove something. In this second decade of my career, I've very much more relaxed more into my role, and I've focused far more actually on doing my job than presenting myself. And I know that sounds a weird thing for a presenter to say, but what I mean is that I focus more on delivering the message and the communication I have to make clear to the public, rather than worrying about, do they see me as XYZ? Do they see me as confident? Do they see me as a genuine TV presenter? I don't worry about that so much. And maybe that's just because of time and experience. I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think as we all get older, I think we feel naturally more comfortable in our own skin, and we don't have as much to prove. So I think for me, imposter syndrome has been different at different points in my career.
Do you think the expectations of your role has changed, though? Because sort of go back 20, 30 years and it was a very male game. And all of a sudden, far more women on TV.
Yeah.
Have the expectations changed in terms of what we expect from, say, a news anchor, a news presenter? I
think, I do. So I think 40 years ago, look, this is just my opinion, but I think women were seen as decorative. I think they were, as long as you could, I think the term auto cutie has been spun around, hasn't it? That you're very pretty and you look good doing your job, but you're maybe not as competent as a man. But I definitely think those days are behind us now. I think if you look, you look at, I think journalism, we've always had women. You look at, when I was growing up, Anna Ford, Moira Stewart, Julie Etchingham on Sky. When I started my career, she was like a big name at Sky and she was brilliant. I just really looked up to her. And so there were some really great female role models like Kate Adie. But I do think that in terms of the big hard-hitting news programmes, like take Newsnight, 20 years ago, Paxman, Gavin Esler, after that, Evan Davies. And now it's Victoria Derbyshire, Emily Maitlis. So, there are some really great female role models showing that actually you're very good at holding to account. You can do those hard-hitting interviews. So I think a lot's changed in my industry for sure.
And do you think women are perceived differently by audiences?
Ooh, I don't know. What do you think?
I've got no idea, really. I do think things have changed since the sort of well, when I was growing up, it was exactly the same. It was a lot of male presenters. And if you ever wanted the authoritative voice, it was always, sort of Hugh Edwards.
Yeah.
Who announces the death of a monarch. It's going to be, definitely a man in a suit.
Yeah.
Even these days.
Yeah. Well, yes. Although actually, funnily enough, they bring Julie Etchingham into that role, with Philip Schofield as it was then. But do I think audience? I think now you've got more women proving they can do the job. I don't think that there's an issue. I mean, I think it depends on the individual. Really, I think it depends on their own biases, how they view. I think it's very hard to generalise what an audience's expectation is. All I know is the feedback I get ever since I've started. Actually, it's very funny. Just remind me, about 11 years ago, Alistair Stewart came over to do an event, to do the IOD debate. And I remember he met myself and my male co-anchor at the time. And he said to my producer, "She's the man in that role." And I said to my producer, "What does he mean?" And she said, "He means that you're the one to do the leads, the lead stories, the big hard-hitting political interviews."
That's interesting. He's still thought of that.
So that was, but that was, I want to say 11, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think that's quite interesting. And I think reputationally, I think that's what I do. I generally do those, even now, out of me and my co-anchor. But it's more because I've got an interest and I like doing it and I think I'm good at it. So that's why I take on those particular responsibilities. But I don't think audiences sit there and think, oh, it's about my, whether I've got boobs or not. It's just about it's about my brain, my ability. I don't think gender should come into it personally. But
and in terms of confidence and imposter syndrome, do what audiences think about you play into that, or is it very
well? As I said, I think when I was younger, I probably cared more about what people think, and now I just focus more on doing the job. And I think that will take you. That's my advice actually to people who struggle with things like public speaking or speaking up in meetings. I think the way to combat the anxiety about that is to just do it anyway. Just focus on what you're trying to achieve and think less about how you're coming across. Because it's that thinking, that internal monologue about, I think we've all been there. You stand up in front of the stage and thinking, oh my God, no, that person's falling asleep. Oh, they're not interested in what I'm saying. Oh, and now, oh God, what was I going to say? And, it's that's interfering with what your focus on the job. So my advice would be focus on the message you're trying to get across and, just breathe into the anxiety. So and I think for me, that's definitely what I've tried to do as I say, in the second decade of my career.
But it's taken you.
Yeah, time.
Yeah.
But that's life, isn't it? I think you only learn. And I think the other thing to say about confidence is it's nuanced. I think you probably do have children who are born naturally a little bit more confident. Maybe they're brought up in an environment with confident parents, very, talkative parents, and who kind of model it for them to speak up and express their needs. But equally, a lot of that, it can also be learned, I think. And a lot of it is about banking your achievements. A psychologist actually once said to me, because I said, well, how do I retain that self-belief? And he said, physically bank it. Every time you get some praise, every time you do something you're proud of, anytime you get some positive feedback on something, literally write it down or find a way to mentally bank it so that you've got evidence to show yourself that you're not as rubbish as you think, or, whatever negative narrative you've got about yourself. And I think you can do that through lots of like micro actions. It doesn't have to be, it's not like you wake up one day and go, oh, I'm confident, or that you can get a therapist to make you confident. A lot of it has to be through your own actions.
And the flip side of confidence in your job is, of course, the sort of people you interview. So on one hand, you've got the sort of blowhard interviewee who has a lot of confidence in what they're saying, but not necessarily well-placed confidence. How do you sort of make sure that the right voices sort of get to be the ones that are talking?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I find a lot of our job is about persuading people to go on camera. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that a lot of people are scared about it. Because there's a kind of a mystic to it, there's this, I don't know, like mystery, that it's somehow you need to be trained to go on camera, which is nonsense. And I think a lot of our job is about educating people to show them it's not as scary as they think it's going to be. And honestly, if I had a penny for every person who said to me after they've done an interview, "Oh, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be," I'd be a millionaire. On like everybody without question who's been reticent to do it and then done it always says that really wasn't as bad, because you're not talking to a camera, you're actually talking to me or another journalist. So you're not doing our job like where you're having to stare down a scary lens, which is quite intimidating. So yeah, a lot of our job is persuading people to do something they don't want to do. And again, that feeds into that people think that they're just going to wake up one day and have confidence to go on camera. 95% of people aren't like that. I'll give you a really good example, actually, and I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning it. But the CEO of Jersey Electricity, I remember I had to interview him when he first came into his role, and he'd never done an interview before, wasn't used to dealing with journalists. And this is a man, by the way. So, when we talk about gender, confidence, my experience is it affects everybody. But he really didn't want it. He wanted to issue a statement, and that's the worst thing you can do for TV. We are TV. We need people to talk on camera. And I almost had to coach him a little bit because he was so nervous, bless him. But after the second, third time he did it, he's like a different person on camera. And he wouldn't have got that confidence had he not done it. So as I say, a lot of it is just going ahead and doing it. So my message to people, if they're watching and if we ever have to contact them to do interviews, is just do it. Just do it, because it's not live, it's pre-recorded. And if you mess up, it takes a pretty heartless, unless you're holding someone firmly to account, and you'd know about that if we're doing the story, you'd know if you've got something to defend. A journalist is really there to help get the best out of you. So it really isn't as scary as you think it's going to be.
But you don't think there's a risk in sort of more strident voices crowding out quieter ones, particularly when it comes to sort of experts and so-called experts?
I'd like more women experts to come forward for sure. And I think it definitely, that feeds into it. I think it's very easy for people to say no.
What holds them back?
Yeah, that perception. I think women are more conscious about how they look, how they sound. And I think it's the ultimate test of imposter syndrome, isn't it? To put yourself out and expose yourself to the public for public criticism by, if you're not confident that you should be doing the job that you're doing and you're espousing your views as an expert, that's a really scary place to be.
I suppose in these days of social media, there'll always be somebody who'll tell you don't know what you're talking about and you're an imposter.
Absolutely.
So it's almost validation for that, your worst fears, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think, I think it's just, I think we've got a job to play as well as journalists, is when I'm trying to convince somebody that they do know what they're talking about, I'll ask them some questions and I'll say, I didn't know that. I think you'd benefit the public to put that out in the public domain to inform them. And I think when you spin it like that, again, taking the emphasis away from how they're going to look, how they're going to sound, actually more focusing on the message that they've got to say, I think that goes some way to combating imposter syndrome. But yeah, sure. We did a thing with PwC, a Women in Business conference, and I was on stage with a CEO of I forget which company, like a big finance company in London, and we were talking about that. And I said to her, "Would you do an interview on camera if I needed some, financial expert opinion?" She said, "Oh God, no, absolutely not." I was like, "Why?" And she admitted it was because she felt like she'd be an imposter if she was doing it, that surely there's someone else out there. Well, actually, no, there's not.
Well, the worry is there might be someone else out there who'll do the interview, but not as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, really interesting. So looking back on your career, do you think things have got better for women in journalism, or has it got more difficult, or is it just different?
I don't know, because in my career, I've never felt that my gender has held me back. Ever, genuinely. But then I have had quite a masculine traits to my personality. So bossy, dominant,
Never noticed.
doesn't take no for an answer, tenacious, pushy. I've been called all these kind of things. But those criticisms didn't bother me. I think I told you earlier that when I was in primary school, my leaving gift at age 11 was a Little Miss Bossy book from the Mr. Men collection. So, clearly I've always, been that way.
You don't think that was chosen at random then? Oh.
No, I'm pretty sure it had a reason. It was either that or Little Miss Chatterbox. But no, I don't think it's held me back personally. And I think in terms of opportunities for women, as I say, I think the way you've seen those programs like Newsnight have lead female anchors, I think that's better modelling than perhaps I had when I was growing up. So I think in that sense, yes, it's better. I think the struggle, if you're going to talk about gender, is when you're of the age to have children. Because I think, look, this is just my personal opinion, but I grew up in the 80s where at school we were told getting pregnant is bad, having a family too young before you've had a career is bad. So all of us put off having children, and now we've got this sort of birth crisis where we've got a birth rate of 1.2 when actually the ideal is to be more 2.5. And it's because a lot of us were sold this sort of dream of having it all, and then you get to this stage of your career where you're kind of at the top of it and you're trying to balance family life and your wants are different as well. Like, so I have less ambition now than I did when I was 25 for sure, because my priorities in life have changed. I think that makes it more difficult for women. And, being a journalist, definitely there's really unsociable hours. I mean, I work Thursday and Friday nights till 11, midnight, which is not conducive to having a kid who wakes up at 6 a.m. So, that suddenly there's these competing demands on women. I think in your 20s, or if you don't have kids, but I think when children come into the mix, yeah, it's definitely more challenging.
So in terms of younger female, in particular, journalists coming through, if you do mentor them, what do you tell them about things like confidence, things like imposter syndrome?
To build confidence by doing the things that scare you, actually. I think there are definite things that I find more challenging. I think I still get nervous if I have to do a holding to account interview. I think I've got to do my job really well here because that's the public's expectation of me. I'm
the avatar for the public.
Yeah, basically I've got to put the questions that matter to the public to this person and not tolerate any waffle or BS, and that's my job. So I definitely get more nervous about doing that. Now, if I listen to those nerves, what anxiety or nervousness tells you is don't do it. Keep yourself safe. But actually, if you do these things, feel the fear and do it anyway, you build confidence by telling your brain that actually we're going to be all right and we can do this. And you just have to keep doing more of that, I think. So I think it's doing the things that scare you. That's not just journalism. I think that's just generally, if speaking up in a meeting scares you, do it. Just, if you find there's a question I want to ask or something, note it down and make sure you ask that question and then mentally bank it that you've done it. Well done. You can do it again.
And does having a mentor help? Does having a role model help?
Yeah, I think so. I had some mentors. Actually, funnily enough, my mentors were men when I was going up through the ranks. But I now mentor other people. But I mentor men and women. I don't see. I'm thinking about. Our newsroom is heavily female dominated. We've got more women in our newsroom than we do male journalists. So, and they all do the top stories and, the difficult work as much as the guys do. So.
And when did that change?
I'm not sure it really did change. I think as long as I've worked, it's been a fairly even split. But it might just be my perception, you see, because I've never found that my gender's held me back. So.
Yeah. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is difficult. But we've definitely mentored. We did we did a series of confidence on camera sessions with female leaders like the Lisa Springate, who was the head of the IOD then, and Pippa Davidson, who was like sort of head of the Lean In movement. And I think that was really useful for them because I think they were shown that it's not as scary as they thought it would be. So we called the sessions confidence on camera because once you've actually done it, you find that you're much better than you thought, and you watch yourself back, and you can unpick things and improve things. But look, the first time you do anything, it's not going to be great, is it? So I just think you've got to get started somewhere. So if you feel like you've got a message to get out in the public, and we ask you to do an interview, just do it, because it could always be edited.
Yeah, except if you're live, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, I mean that's a different kettle of fish. But most of our interviews, we'd rarely interview somebody who's never done it live. That would be a bit mean, I think.
Well, with that, I think that's probably all we've got time for. So, I'd like to thank
that's a shame.
Jess for coming in.
You're welcome. I don't know if I've added any value to anybody's life, but
a really thought-provoking conversation. I mean, if there's a message, I think it's, look, anxiety and confidence issues affect everybody. In workplaces, I think the way in which we think about confidence in particular is still quite a developing area. The importance of confidence, the importance of vulnerability, what we expect from people, particularly leaders, I think is still really quite complicated, which is why, you still, I think, get so many men in sort of positions of authority, because a lot of organisations still value all of those types of attributes, but things are changing, and I think if there's a message from this, if you suffer from anxiety or imposter syndrome or lack of confidence, you're not alone, and actually you'd be an outlier if you did, or you did not.
And also to recognise that everybody will struggle with it to different degrees, won't they? Yeah. They'll struggle with confidence, and it depends on what day, what point of your career. So for me, it's not black and white. Yeah. I don't think you either have imposter syndrome or have confidence. I think there's a sliding scale of how much you feel those things on different days and different situations.
And lots of those things go with high performance as well. I mean, that's the most notable thing, that some of the most high-performing individuals are really the ones who are most conscious about things like imposter syndrome or anxiety or lack of confidence. Really interesting area. And yes, there are things you can do if those things are holding you back.
Get therapy.
You can get therapy, apparently. Or get a
therapy
coach or a mentor.
Yeah, exactly. A career coach.
Well, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Anytime.
And if you'd like to talk to us about any of the issues that we've raised today, whether it's in a workplace setting or in relation to discrimination or other issues, please do get in touch. Otherwise, we'll see you again in our next episode.